Did you turn it on? So.
Go.
It's still on. I'm waiting for it to go off. In any case, welcome back, friends, to the second day in our third panel here at the Deep Truth Symposium, Visionaries Speak Out. I am Tom Kiley, your moderator, and our third panel today and final one for today is called Triple Blockade, the Israeli attack on Gaza, free speech, and democracy. And once again, I would like to remind all you viewers that the inspiration for this Deep Truth Symposium was the fact that we could not make these presentations in New York City at the 2018 Left Forum. And our speakers did not want to be deterred, so we endeavored to provide you an ability to hear their voice so you yourself could make up your own mind as to whether or not these speakers should be heard or not, or whether you should be protected from their words. So let's start with our first speaker on this panel. We welcome back Allison Weir. She was with us last night, albeit by videotape. Today she's with us live. And Allison, just an indefatigable journalist who some time ago discovered the plight of the Palestinian people and has been working so hard to make Americans more aware of what is going on in Palestine. Her organization and website is called If Americans Knew. Allison, welcome back to the Deep Truth Conference.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for giving us a chance to give the information that we were hoping to give live and in person in New York at the Left Forum conference, but we're prevented from doing so. So today I'll be speaking on the If Americans Knew panel on Gaza and censorship. And I've been asked for my particular segment to address two specific topics. First of all, to go into some detail and explain the censorship of our If Americans Knew panel by the Left Forum and some of the backstory to that. There's a long backstory, so I'll try to keep that as brief as I'm able to. And then for the second half of my talk, I'll be giving a prequel to Gaza. A lot of people, fortunately, I think, have been following what's been going on in Gaza recently for the past over 2 months of nonviolent demonstrations met by lethal violence. So my role is to tell what came before that and to describe my trip there as a freelance reporter in early 2001. But anyway, starting with the first half of my topic, the Left Forum censorship of the If Americans Knew panel. I guess I'll start with the backstory that last year I was honored to be invited to be on a panel speaking about Palestine at the Left Forum. My fellow panelist, Joel Simpson, and I were very pleased to see that it was extremely well attended. I think all of the seats were taken, and I think some people were even standing in the back. It was very well received. People were enthusiastic. There were a lot of questions and discussion, and it seemed to have been a very successful panel. So this year, we decided at If Americans Knew that we would submit our own panel where we could tell more about Palestine, specifically address Gaza, and tell about the censorship and all the efforts to try to silence the voices that are trying to speak about Palestine. So we submitted a panel. It was, as you'll see in today's panel, very diverse. A Palestinian American from Gaza, a Palestinian Colombian American filmmaker, a blogger from Illinois, and myself from the San Francisco area. But sadly, it was rejected by the Left Forum without explanation. Even though we've been working on this issue for very long, and many people feel that we're an important organization working on the Palestinian issue, the Left Forum didn't allow us to have a panel. We discovered afterwards what had gone on, so I will share some of that with you. My background is journalism, and journalists, we just think people should know things. We don't sort of like behind the scenes maneuvering and sort of elitist point where some people are allowed to know things and other people you don't tell publicly what's going on. So in general, I think everybody has the right to know what's going on. And I believe in the public sort of right to know. So I'll go into some of the background. What we discovered is that the program director, I think the person in charge of programming, is an individual named Marcus Grach. I hope I'm pronouncing his word correctly. Apparently, he decided to reject our panel based on accusations against us by Jewish Voice for Peace. Unfortunately, Marcus, whom I've never met and I expect is a good person, but he didn't check those accusations with us and give us the chance to defend ourselves, to counter that, to give the real information at all. Unfortunately, also, I'm sure he was very busy. The Left Forum is a major, very complicated event. So I'm afraid he was too busy to look into the accusations. If he had done so, he would have found that they have been discredited by many people. We had addressed every one of the points against us and provided the factual information about it. Even more important, there are two very large public letters, petitions in support of us and opposed to the Jewish Voice for Peace leadership's condemnation of us and accusations against us. These two petitions have been signed by massive numbers of people, some of the most respected leaders in Palestine itself, nonviolence leaders, some of the Palestinian scholars, many of the American activists and international activists working on this issue, many of the members that went on flotilla missions, risking their lives to bring justice to Palestine. Many members of Jewish Voice for Peace signed these petitions in support of us and in opposition to their leaders' accusations, unfounded accusations against us. It's unfortunate Marcus didn't discover those things, because if he had, I suspect we would have given this panel at the Left Forum. At least I hope that's what would have happened. So just to go into that a little bit more, because I keep hearing about these accusations. They're continually used against us, especially by Zionists, attempting to block our information, to suppress my book, and to prevent my talks. So I'm going to address a little bit more about what these two petitions said. The first one was signed by over 2,000 people. You can look at them, and it's really an amazing array of people that signed the petition. It said, quote, "We are dismayed by the recent unfounded attacks on one of the top organizations working on this issue, If Americans Knew, and its dedicated leader, Allison Weir." The petition says, quote, "We believe that the vitriolic, ADL-like accusations that Allison Weir is, quote, anti-Semitic and or racist are scurrilous and without foundation." They are without foundation. I have a life history of opposing all racism and all bigotry. The petition says, quote, "We believe strongly that secret dossiers, ideological inquisitions, double standards, misrepresentations, spreading innuendo, and attempting to excommunicate groups or individuals one disagrees with from the ranks of the movement sow unnecessary divisions and distract from what must be our main focus, building the broad united front that's necessary to change U.S. policy in the Middle East and to help Palestinians obtain justice in their homeland." The second petition was also quite strong, signed by about 2,000 people. It said, quote, "We must not undermine one another. None of us must act as gatekeepers, trying to limit or dominate the movement. Instead, we must all coexist and focus our energy and resources on our goal, peace and justice in Palestine." I believe in that strongly. I believe JVP is doing much important work. I encourage people to look and join the work that they've done. So why were these accusations against us that prevented us from having this panel live in New York City at the Left Forum in 2018? What's behind this? Many people have speculated about that. It's very puzzling to many people who were shocked to see these attacks on us by JVP, by the JVP leadership. Again, let me emphasize, it's not the JVP membership. Many members have been very supportive of us. Some JVP members have sponsored my talks, etc. But one person looked into the situation, well, many did, but one of them wrote an article on Counterpunch that I think did a very good job of explaining what might be behind what's going on to censor some of the information about Palestine that many of us feel is extremely important for everyone to have the chance to learn about. In this article on Counterpunch, longtime peace activist Jack Dresser wrote, quote, Allison's politically incorrect policy has been to disseminate salient facts to anyone, anywhere, to achieve the broadest possible reach among American citizens without political discrimination. That's entirely correct. Our view at If Americans Knew is that since the US gives Israel over $10 million per day, that gives American citizens the responsibility to know how our money is being used by Israel. And I feel it also gives every American citizen, regardless of race, religion, ethnicity, or political orientation, the right to know that information and the obligation to act in ways that they feel are morally required. The article in Counterpunch goes on to discuss more why these attacks continue against If Americans Knew and why there's this attempt to suppress our information. Quote, unlike the organizations attacking her, Allison has always taken an unequivocal and uncompromising position against the legality and morality of the entire Zionist project, focusing on the 1948 Nakba and UN-established right of return, not just the Israeli occupation. So-called liberal or progressive Zionists evade the former and often pretend that the crimes began in 1967. Quote, those of us firmly supporting justice for Palestinians have observed JVP for many years as compromised by Zionist colonial sympathies, but improving recently by endorsing the full BDS campaign, unquote. Just briefly, unfortunately, that part I'm concerned about because while JVP has belatedly joined the BDS campaign, this is the Boycott Against Israel campaign, I'm not sure to what degree given that the head of JVP's spouse works for an Israeli company. And the name of the company is Checkpoint Software, named after the notorious checkpoints at which Palestinians are routinely humiliated, often beaten, sometimes shot, sometimes killed. The checkpoints at which people are often prevented from going to their work, to school, to the hospital. Checkpoints where Palestinian women trying to go to the hospital to give birth have been stopped. Their babies dying at the checkpoint. Sometimes the mothers themselves also dying at these checkpoints. Going back to the Counterpunch article, it says the timing of the excommunication of me is not random. I suspect that it is publication of her book Against Our Better Judgment that has released long stockpiled ammo against her, however flimsy, especially her revelations of arguably treasonous conduct by our first two widely revered Jewish Supreme Court justices, both pledged to Zionism above loyalty to country, as members of a secret Zionist organization, the Perishim. By the way, the information on that is from a Jewish scholarly journal, and the author of the article, the main article that provides that information, is Dr. Sarah Schmidt, an Israeli professor at a mainstream Israeli university. My book is over half citations, so everything that I say, people can look at the citations and determine the accuracy for themselves. The Counterpunch article goes on to say, if Justice Louis Brandeis was instrumental, as the evidence suggests, in persuading President Wilson to betray his 1916 campaign promise and declare war on Germany as a quid quid pro quo for the Balfour Declaration, a decision costing over 116,000 American lives, double those killed in Vietnam. This is explosive information indeed. In addition, the article says, Allison's research indicates that future Justice Felix Frankfurter was instrumental in preventing an early World War I peace treaty with the Ottomans that would have obviated the Balfour Declaration, terminating or seriously restricting the Zionist movement and the havoc that followed. This information had been published elsewhere, but remained obscure. Some would like to keep it obscure, unquote. That's from Counterpunch. Now to get on to the second half of my presentation, the prequel to Gaza, to what's going on in Gaza today that my fellow panelists will discuss in far greater detail. It's important to understand, as my colleague Ziad will discuss, that Israel was created through a massive ethnic cleansing of the population that had lived on that land for generations. When the political Zionist movement began, the population of Palestine, what then later became called Israel, was 80% Muslim, about 15% Christian, and a little bit under 5% Jewish, all living together in peace. When Israel was established through its founding war, it expelled at least 750,000 people, perhaps even more than that. A significant portion of those individuals pushed out very violently. There were a number of massacres of Palestinian villages, went to Gaza. To the population of Gaza today, almost 2 million people, at least 70%, I've seen some reports that may be as high as 80% of Gazans are refugee families who were pushed out from their land in what is now called Israel. This is extremely important to understand. The border, as it's called, between Israel and Gaza, the fence where the recent, about over 2 months worth of nonviolent demonstrations by Gazans, that is not an international border. That was an armistice line, and it was always made clear it was not an external border. Israel has never set its borders. When it established its state by choice, it never wrote a constitution, and it never set its borders. So when someone from Gaza may attempt to go across that fence and return to his or her ancestral home, that individual has every right to do that. It is an internationally recognized right that all refugees, regardless of race, religion, or ethnicity, have the right to return to their homes. Now I'll get to the final part of my talk, which is to describe what Gaza was like when I visited there in early 2001. I went as a freelance reporter. I was not part of a delegation. I had no organization sponsoring my trip or showing me around or helping me whatsoever. I traveled over there as a freelance reporter to see for myself what was going on. This was in February and March of 2001, before a number of months before 9/11. So I'll show you, if I can do the technical part of this presentation properly, I'll show you the type of the pictures that I took from that trip. I saw at that time that Palestinians already were being kept in small prisons within larger prisons. They often couldn't go from one town to the next town over to visit their grandchildren, to visit their son, to visit their mother, to go to the hospital, as I've mentioned, to go to work, to go to school. There were checkpoints, Israeli checkpoints, at that time in Gaza itself, preventing Palestinians from passing, controlling their movements within Gaza. I also saw that parts of Gaza were being shelled nightly. I was in some of those parts. These pictures now are from the Tufa area of Khan Yunis in Gaza. Let me see if this is going to work. This is what Gaza looked like in February and March of 2001. These are photos I took. This was a place that had a family, these were family homes. This is where, Palestinian men, women, and children were living. This is what was being done to it by Israeli forces in 2001. Here's a close-up. Here's one of the homes that had been full of a family. I saw some homes where Palestinians were still living in the center of their home. They had mattresses on the floor where they were hoping they were safer and that they and their children would not be killed by Israeli shelling. Here's another picture. Here's the Tufa area of Khan Yunis in Gaza. Crowds of people would come up to me. I was the only American journalist there. They would smile at me and welcome me. They were pleased that an American journalist had come to see what was going on. And as you look at this picture, I'm hoping that this is showing on the screen properly. As you look at this picture, you'll see that massive devastation to this area. And this is before a single rocket had been fired from Gaza. No rockets yet had been fired. This was a number of years before Hamas became the leadership of Gaza. The US media consistently tell Americans that Israel is supposedly defending itself from rockets and from Hamas. Well, this is what it looked like before Hamas was there and before Gaza and before rockets had been fired. I remember seeing children. They would bring to me piles of spent bullets. People would want to show me every bullet hole in their homes. I saw this had been a 100-year-old stand of date palms. The livelihood for a huge extended family was now flattened and destroyed. I saw ancient olive groves were destroyed. I talked to farmers who had farmed there forever. For generation upon generation, these farmers had been on that land in Gaza, and now they were destroyed. I wondered what they would do. How does a farmer feed his family when even his orchards are destroyed, when his whole farm is gone? I saw a people and a land being destroyed already in early 2001. This didn't start last year. This didn't start in 2006. This is 2001, and of course there have been many invasions before that time as well. I also saw on that trip and on my trips since many children who have been shot by Israeli forces. Often they're shot in the back, running away. Some have been shot in the stomach. I've seen Palestinian children who are shot in the teeth, in the chest, in the leg, you name it. I saw one little boy in Gaza on that trip who was brain dead. He'd been shot in the head, as many children have. If you go to our website, we have a list of the children who have been killed and their cause of death. So this is some of what was being seen. I'm going to try now to go back to maybe stop the screen share for a period of time. If I can remember how you do that. I guess I've forgotten how to do that.
You again now, Allison. Go ahead.
Okay, are you seeing me now?
Yes, you're coming through fine.
Okay, great. So this is for the situation in Gaza, even before the recent events of what was going on. A population increasingly desperate. I expect my other panelists will be giving some of the information about the restrictive policies in which Israel has enacted a blockade against Gaza that's gone on now for, I believe, 11 years. Children's growth is being stunted. There's malnutrition. All of this began quite a few years ago. It's extremely important to know that. Also, if I can go back for a last little bit, I will try to share a little bit more about the rockets, because that's, of course, one of the main talking points that Israel consistently uses in defending their actions, and the talking points that the Israeli media consistently repeat. I'll skip my pictures. This is Gaza when I went back more recently in about 2010, places that had been full of families when I was there before. But let me just tell a little bit about Palestinian rockets. Most people are never told that these are small, often short-range projectiles, homemade projectiles that do almost no damage whatsoever. In the entire time that they've been used, thousands of rockets have been fired from Gaza. They've killed approximately 30 people. If you add mortars, I think it comes to 47. These are the number of Gazans that had been killed as of several years ago. Now the number is quite a bit higher. In terms of children, Americans hear about Israeli children who have been killed. We usually see their names, their parents. We grieve for those children as we should, but we almost never learn about the Palestinian children killed during that same period of time. It's my view that we should be informed about all of those children, that we should care about all of those children, and that we should demand that Israel stop using our money the way it's using. And I feel that we should demand that the US stop giving our tax money to Israel. It's time to bring a stop to this violence and for Americans to stop funding it. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on this panel and give information that I was not allowed to give at the Left Forum. And now I'd like to turn my time over to my fellow colleagues to tell more about Gaza. Thanks very much.
And before we go to our next speaker, Ziad, I just wanted to make it a little more clear, friends, that this panel is actually a panel that was put together exclusively by Allison and her organization, and is an allied panel with our effort here in the Deep Truth Conference. So this is the panel that If Americans Knew was intending to present at the Left Forum, and you're hearing what the Left Forum apparently didn't want you to hear. We're going to go now to Ziad Shadaha, and Ziad was born in Gaza, in a camp in Gaza. He is the son of Nakba survivors, and lived also through the Six-Day War before he relocated to Saudi Arabia as a displaced person. He's lived in the Palestinian diaspora. He came to the United States and got a degree in civil engineering at the University of Illinois. And he works as an advocate for peace and justice for the Palestinian people. Ziad and his wife, Kathy, also work for equality and justice for other marginalized groups through their civic organization, Unity in Diversity. Ziad, thank you very much for joining us today. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. Hi. Am I on? Hi.
You're ready to go. We're listening.
Yeah, okay. Sorry. Thank you very much for the introduction. Hi, my name is Ziad Shahada. I'm so happy that Deep Truth has given us a platform to talk about Gaza. I also appreciate being a part of the If Americans Knew panel. I'm honored to be with Allison Weir, who has done so much for the Palestinian people. Thank you, Allison. You could read a book about the history of Palestine or some articles about current events in Gaza, and you would learn a lot, but they would not help you understand the Palestinian heart. I'm going to take you on my family's journey, which is really just like thousands of other journeys by thousands of other Palestinian families. 70 to 80% of the people who live in Gaza today are from families who are really just like mine. I was born in Deir al-Balah refugee camp in the Gaza Strip, 1960. I consider myself a Palestinian first and I identify with the people of Gaza. But I don't presume that put myself in the same category with them. They live under the harsh reality that I only see from a distance. I hope that when you hear their story, you will understand how our collective journey has shaped us into the people we are today. Although the people of Gaza are desperate, they are determined as a people who want to embrace life. They are willing to face snipers' bullets because they care that much about justice. I find that inspiring and humbling. My family has been in Palestine for hundreds of years at least. This book is called Historical Geography of Palestine, Transjordan, and Southern Syria in the late 16th century. It is based on census registers in 1596 by the Ottoman Empire. 1596. It lists all of the towns, their populations, religions, taxes paid, and more. My family's town, Ibdis, IBDIS, is listed, so it's at least 400 years old. Slide number 1, please. This is Fatima, my grandmother, my mom's mom. She was born in Ibdis around 1900. Slide number 2, please. Here is my grandfather on my dad's side, Mahmoud. My mom and dad and my oldest brother, Muhammad, were also born in Ibdis. Slide number 3, please. Sometimes I picture my mom and dad as kids living in Ibdis. I'm sure they played and worked like kids anywhere in the world, and their parents dreamed of a bright future. While they were growing up in Ibdis, the World Zionist Organization in Europe was persuading Jews to move to Palestine using the slogan, "A land without people for a people without a land." After the fall of the Ottoman Empire, Great Britain occupied Palestine, and for years it helped the Zionist cause and undermined the native Palestinians. My mom told me that in the 1940s, Arab Palestinians were not allowed to own a gun. Her brother had one that he kept hidden in his house. The Brits found out and put him in jail. She saw this happen with her own eyes. For some mysterious reason, the British were helping to disarm the Palestinians and arm the Jewish residents. Over 300,000 Jewish immigrants came in the 1920s and 30s. By 1939, 30% of the population was Jewish. Palestinians knew about the persecution of Jews in Europe and welcomed Jewish refugees to Palestine. But it became clear that the Jewish population was planning to take over. There were riots all over Palestine. Britain gave up and handed the mess over the United Nations. In November 1947, the UN came up with a partition plan, giving 56% of it to the Jews. The Palestinians rejected the plan. The Arab world warned that there would be a fight. The UN partition plan essentially took away Palestine's right to self-determination, even though self-determination is in the UN Charter. Immediately, in November 1947, months before the declaration of the State of Israel, the Zionist army began taking over villages all over Palestine, 300 of them before the war, which started the next May, and 118 more during the war. My family's town, Ibdis, was attacked the first time in February 1948, before the war. The men of the village managed to fight off the Zionist army. At midnight on May 14, 1948, the British occupying forces went home, and the Jewish People's Council proclaimed the creation of the State of Israel. On May 15th, the neighboring Arab countries went to war with the new state, as they had promised. Zionist leaders had anticipated this war for several years and contacted wealthy people all over the world, including people in the government in the United States, Great Britain, and some Eastern European countries. They convinced them to finance and smuggle in 10 tanks, dozens of warplanes, tens of thousands of machine guns and rifles, and tens of millions of rounds of ammunition. He also had an underground factory that manufactured ammunition and submachine guns. On the other hand, the Palestinians had almost no military capacity. When Israel won the war, it wasn't a miracle from God. It was superior military capability. That's it. Abdus was attacked again in July 1948. During the war, most of the men of the village, including my dad, had left to join the Egyptian army. The village was captured. My mom told me that during the evacuation of Abdus, one of my uncles was walking with his children, and his wife was maybe about 100 yards behind him, carrying a baby. An Israeli plane flew overhead and dropped a barrel bomb. My aunt and the baby were hit, and there was nothing left of them. Just like that. This was not a one-time incident. This is a pattern that continues to this day. Israel shamelessly kills innocent people. This is part of their history and ours. By the end of the war, Israel had captured 78% of historic Palestine. The Palestinians ended up with what we now call the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. Over 750,000 Palestinians were expelled or fled from their homes. That's 85% of the population. Most of them would never return, including the people of my village, Abdus. The Israeli government demolished the villages and built new Jewish-only towns or planted forests or crops. They didn't want the Arabs to have a place to come back to. Slide 4, please. Our family recently went to the site of Abdus. I used my iPhone to find it. It's farmland now. It's actually watermelons, you can see. Slide number 5, please. There is nothing left but remnants of a well and some stones that were probably a cemetery. My parents and my brother, and later 2 more brothers, spent several years, most of the 50s, moving around, staying with Bedouins or wherever they could. They would do farm work in exchange for shelter and food. Eventually, they came to Deir al-Balah town, a small town with a UN refugee camp. Deir al-Balah was the smallest camp out of 8 in Gaza Strip, with 30,000 refugees. Slide number 6, please. Our family got a little cinder block room like this. 1 room with a corrugated steel roof and a cement floor. We had no electricity, running water, or sewage pipes. There was an outhouse every few blocks and a water pump. In the winter, the outhouse was the warmest place, and my brother Ibrahim used to take a blanket and go sleep there. True story. The UN gave us food and clothes and started schools for us. I loved school. I got my first pair of shoes, flip-flops, when I was 6 because I was old enough to go to school. My dad went to Saudi Arabia in the late 1950s to work. He sent us a little money each month. I grew up without dad for most of the first 7 years of my life. I had a baby sister named Bahia, but she got the chicken pox and died when she was only 6 months old. My dad never even got to see her. For 6 months in 1956-57, during the Suez Crisis, Israel occupied the Gaza Strip. Then in 1967, hostility was high between Israel and Egypt. Gaza was under Egyptian administration, so Israel considered us the enemy too. We would hear a siren and we knew the Israeli planes were coming, so we'd hide in ditches. I used to help dig the ditches. Even though I was only 6 years old, I got to live through the Six-Day War. By the end, Israel controlled all of the remaining Palestinian lands. The Gaza Strip and the West Bank were now fully subject to Israel. And East Jerusalem, which we wanted to be the capital of Palestine someday, was annexed. My dad applied to a special program and we were allowed to move to Saudi Arabia. But my mom had to sign a paper relinquishing her rights to everything she was leaving behind. Not that there was that much to leave. We were powerless. If we stayed, our life would be full of hardship. If we left, we would lose our rights and our identity. This gives you an idea of the background and baggage that most Palestinians carry with us. Every action we take is built on our history and our hope for the future, or our despair. Today, there are at least 8 million Palestinian refugees living outside the historic Palestine. Many of us are still hoping to go back home someday. People have always said, just go live in a different Arab country and make a new home. Give up on Palestine. Let me explain why this is just not a reasonable idea. Over 70% of Gazans are refugees. They came from villages and towns like Abdus that are in what is now known as Israel. Most of them are farmers and country people. Their families have lived on their land for hundreds of years. Their pride and identity and wealth are tied to the land. These people would literally die for their land. When they lost the land, they lost everything. They felt disgraced. That's not something you outgrow quickly. It's part of every breath. I feel that they were robbed of the opportunity to defend themselves properly, especially by the British occupier, which left them in a hostile environment with no way to defend themselves. When Gazans talk about the right of return, which was guaranteed by the United Nations 70 years ago, but never happened, they are talking about the deepest longing in their hearts. Most Gazans don't care about revenge. They just want to touch their soil again, sit under their fig trees, feel like they are home. They miss their lands. I miss it too. For the generation of Palestinians who were exiled in 1948, like my parents, they know exactly what they lost, and they are tortured with thoughts that they should have fought harder. They feel that they failed their land and their people. My generation does not know the loss in the same way, but we know the stories. We have the early memories. We see the sadness in our parents' faces. I saw my mom and dad both get old and die before their time because they were sick and exhausted from struggling every single day. Our children's generation feels some of that pain and sometimes anger or helplessness or deep sadness. Many Gazan children don't know what it feels like to have a full stomach or a house without bullet holes. Their fathers are out of work or in jail or dead. They know the smell of tear gas and taste of contaminated water. Many have lived their whole lives under blockade. If it sounds grim, that's because it is grim. But we don't feel sorry for ourselves. Palestinians are proud people. Before the Zionist project started, Palestine was full of culture and industry, and its people were highly educated, especially in the cities. There was also a lot of westernization and great openness. The farmers, the country people lived a simple life and loved their land. Please slide 7 to 11. Alan, you can just scroll through this, through the pictures. Here are some photos I found online on the Australian War Memorial Archive website. They show a day in the early 1940s when a group of men from an Australian training outpost were invited to a local Palestinian village feast. By the way, the name of this village was Ibtis. Both of my grandmothers probably cooked this meal. My mom told me many years ago about this event, and I was so surprised and happy that someone took pictures. The point is that Palestinians were and still are intelligent and peace-loving people. Zionists have always, till today, portrayed us as uncivilized or violent, but that's a complete fabrication. In 2008, 2012, and 2014, Israel attacked Gaza. Each time there was great loss of life, mostly civilians and children. In addition, factories, schools, hospitals, and infrastructure were destroyed. Tens of thousands of people lost their jobs. Hundreds of thousands lost their homes. Then Israel refused to allow the people to rebuild. They have refused to let food aid and medical supplies in. There is no clear water and electricity, only a few hours a day. Israel's blockade is against international law and has been condemned many times by human rights organizations and the United Nations, but nothing is happening. The UN Humanitarian Affairs Office says that the Israeli blockade on Gaza, which is in its 12th year now, is the main cause for the high unemployment rate, which is over 43%, and the poverty rate. 80% of Gazans live below the poverty line. It is not surprising that depression and suicide have become a huge problem, especially for young people. Many of those who attempt suicide are highly educated, university graduates. They have no hope of finding a job, no hope of living, and they feel there is no point in living. These are the best of the best in Gaza, and we are losing them. I'm proud to say that literacy rates in the occupied Palestinian territories are some of the highest in the world. Even with the hardship, a college education is a high priority. Gaza has 18 accredited colleges, and over half of the students are female. This is a highly educated, progressive society. Israel and Israel supporters try to discredit Gazans by stereotyping us Hamas followers. You know that in the last few months, during the Great March of Return, Israel snipers have killed about 125 unarmed protesters, including medical personnel, journalists, people who were praying, people with disabilities, and even children. They also shot at the ambulances and hospital tents. At least 500 Palestinians have been shot in the head, and 13,000 have been injured. American politicians don't care. Why? Because they think the protests are led by Hamas, and they claim most of the dead were Hamas militants. They don't know what they are talking about. I'm going to give you a crash course right now, Hamas 101. Slide 12, please. Palestinians always wanted to resist Israel and get their land back. So in 1964, they founded the PLO, political party that was willing to use armed resistance. It was led by Yasser Arafat and Fatah. At times, their tactics were ruthless. After 1967, Arafat was exiled to Jordan, then Lebanon, and then Tunisia. He could not run an armed group from that distance. So the PLO turned towards diplomacy and even recognized the State of Israel in 1988. Slide 13, please. Then Arafat made more concessions in 1993, which essentially gave Israel control over 82% of the West Bank. Slide 14, please. Today, 600,000 Israeli settlers live in Palestinian land in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Palestinians are essentially living under apartheid. Yasser Arafat's diplomacy did not do any good for us, only for Israel. The people of Gaza did not want more concessions. They wanted to resist, and Hamas did too. So when there was an election in 2006, the PLO was out and Hamas was in. Israel punished the whole population of Gaza for electing Hamas by imposing a brutal blockade. Israel expected that would make Gazans miserable enough to overthrow Hamas. But the people are more dedicated to resistance than ever. According to the international law, long-term occupation is illegal. Gaza has been under occupation since 1967. Some will argue that the occupation ended in 2005, but Israel is still in control. By definition, as long as Gaza's government does not have full and free exercise of sovereignty, the occupation is still in place. International law also says that organized resistance against occupation is legal. Israel acts like occupation is legal and the resistance is illegal, but it's the opposite. Even armed resistance is legal. The protesters in the Great March of Return are unarmed, but even if they carried weapons, their action would be legal. It takes courage to resist when snipers are taking aim. It's not culture of hatred and death that makes Gazan protest. It is a culture of determination and willingness to make the ultimate sacrifice for a better future. People fight against injustice every day all over the world, and that doesn't make them terrorists. Israel and American politicians tell us that Hamas is pure evil. The day after Israel snipers killed 60 Gazans, Nikki Haley told the UN Secretary Council, "Make no mistake, Hamas is pleased with the results from yesterday." Nobody in Gaza is pleased when Palestinians are killed. Her statement goes back to the belief that Palestinians are monsters and we worship death. Is Gaza swarming with Hamas militants, really? Ready to wipe Israel off the map? It is ridiculous to believe that just 2% of Gaza's population, 40,000 Hamas militants, could destroy the mighty Israel with its hundreds of thousands of soldiers and powerful military weapons and equipment. They even have nuclear weapons, for God's sake. It is equally ridiculous and insulting to hear Prime Minister Netanyahu saying, Israel must protect its sovereign borders, and then using snipers to kill innocent people, innocent demonstrators who are still inside Gaza. This issue did not start when Trump moved the US embassy. The blockade of Gaza has been gone for 11 years. The occupation started 50 years ago. The State of Israel was born on Palestinian land 70 years ago, and the British started dealing unjustly with the Palestinians 100 years ago. We have been resisting all along. We have been fighting injustice for 100 years. The bottom line here is the world needs to respect the Palestinian resistance, especially in Gaza. Their resistance did not start with Hamas. Actually, Hamas came out of the resistance. They came out of the first intifada that started in Gaza in 1987 and went till 1993. At the end, I thank you for listening, and please keep this topic alive. Learn and share our story. We need people to care and get involved. When there are enough of us, we can bring about a genuine just solution. You keep our hope alive, especially the people of Gaza. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ziad. We're now going to hear from Samir Salem. Samir
Hello?
is, yes. Can you hear me, Samir?
Yes, I hear you perfectly.
Very good. Samir is a young activist, filmmaker, entrepreneur, working toward social justice. He was raised in a multicultural family in a diverse blue-collar neighborhood in Chicago. And this upbringing allowed Samir to form a unique perspective on his identity with a broad range of people, cultures, and ideologies. Samir has been making films and working with Alison Weir's organizations, If Americans Knew, as a cinematographer and motion picture with a motion picture company, which is defined by his blue collar attitude that he was raised with. Samir, let's welcome you to the Deep Truth Conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Everyone out there, thank you for listening and for watching my videos. I want to start out first with two quotes. These are quotes from Ilan Pappé, noted Israeli historian. This first quote was in September 2006. Incremental genocide is taking place in Gaza. He wrote that article about the first Israeli massacre after the disengagement plan, which was 2006, called Operation Summer Rain and Operation Autumn Clouds. The Israelis massacred, I think, about 484 Palestinians, 50 or so children. 8 years later, in another article, Ilan Pappé wrote, 2014, Israel's present assault on Gaza indicates that this policy continues unabated. That was about Operation Protective Edge, which was an Israeli massacre that killed 2,200 Palestinians, hundreds and hundreds of children. Also, I think it was 1,800 civilians. 4 years later, how many have they killed now? A lot of you already have been watching the Great Return March and been seeing the numbers go up. Well, I was initially going to start with a video showing the incremental genocide, basically a history of Gaza up until now. Ziad gave you a lot of history of that, and also myself and another filmmaker at IAK are still working on that video, and so hopefully you guys out there will follow If Americans Knew on Twitter, follow us on Facebook, and you'll be able to see that video next week. Another thing that we do at IAK is we have this website called IsraelPalestineTimeline.org, and that catalogs all of the deaths, Palestinians killed by Israelis, Israelis killed by Palestinians since 2000. The numbers are, of course, way skewed, but it's just a catalog to. It's not just numbers. We want to know who these people are. There's a life behind every name and every number, and so a lot of what I do is showing the story behind the death. And so if we can show a few of these videos now, I'd like you to meet a few of the personal stories from Gaza. Alan, can you play IAK1, please? Not sure why the video paused. Alan, you there?
Alan, we have a paused video. Can you please take a look at it? Samir, you may want to speak a little bit while it's being straightened out. It's very powerful film there.
Yeah, thank you very much. So the idea behind a lot of these shorter films is to get the personal story behind, you know, a bomb here or a bomb there. And a lot of these are individuals who aren't in the stats because they died 9-10 years later. And so these are just names that we feel people should know. The next video I want to show is I think we're going to show some of the protests along the fence and how the Israeli snipers, I guess a lot of you guys have been reading in the media how they clash with our protesters. If we can get the video rolling. If not, then maybe I'll just, can I play it from my end? No. Well,
I'm not sure, Samir, but you know, I for one, I'm very interested in how you acquired this footage. Did you shoot this yourself, or did you gather it from people who were there?
it's a mix. Some of the footage is gathered from Gaza. Some of it is pulled from the internet. Some of it is actually none of these is anything that I shot. At the end, we have some footage from individuals in Gaza, and so a lot of what I'm trying to do with IAK is give people in Gaza a voice and a way to reach Americans. And so like that's the final video that I want to show is individuals. Some are reporters, some are just Gazans living, just trying to survive in Gaza, and that's really all I have.
Samir, I think we are restarting the computer with the video, so hopefully it'll be back online shortly.
Thank you.
Yep.
You can,
have you been there to film footage yourself?
I went last year, and the Israelis don't allow me into the country, so I have not been.
Yeah, that was a question I would have. I would imagine it would be very difficult for you to get in and out, especially with video footage. Yeah,
well, to get in, the last time I got in was 2010, and they checked all my tapes, all my footage. If I was going back in again, I would have to send it out through the cloud or whatever. But in 2017, I was denied entry. So
what was that experience like? How long did it take for them to determine that they didn't want you to enter?
It took over 2 days and about 14 hours total. 6 hours the first day.